Thank you so much for joining us here on Indianapolis This Week, ahead of a historic week in the state of Indiana as Governor-elect Eric Holcomb will be sworn in Monday. We'll look ahead to the new administration and take a look back at outgoing Governor Mike Pence's legacy here. But first, a short-lived retirement for longtime Indiana Republican Senator Dan Coats. He's now set to join the Trump administration, tabbed by the president-elect to become the Director of National Intelligence. Coats had served on the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. He spent time in Trump Tower shortly after the election and said he gave advice to Trump but didn't push for a position.
I didn't come here to ask to be considered for anything. I was invited here to just sit down and discuss a number of issues that the president will be facing, and I gave him some of my years of experience in terms of what I thought they would be dealing with. I told him I want to assist wherever I can, but I'm not seeking a specific position.
Coats was viewed by many as a hawk on Russia while serving in the Senate. Much more on his transition to that new role in the days and weeks ahead. News of Coats' appointment to become head of national intelligence came as the intelligence community was in the spotlight this week. Intelligence agency heads briefed the president and testified on Capitol Hill Thursday about the Russian hacks ahead of the election.
How would you describe your confidence in attributing these attacks to the Russian government as opposed to someone in your basement?
It's very high.
Ahead of his own briefing on Friday, Trump told the New York Times that the hubbub surrounding the Russian hacking allegations is simply a political witch hunt. Senator Joe Donnelly this week also on the Senate floor to welcome his new colleague Todd Young to the Senate. Young, as part of the 115th Congress, was sworn in this week. The three-term Republican congressman defeated Democrat Evan Bayh in November. Joining Young and Donnelly there, former Indiana Senator Richard Lugar. Also on Capitol Hill this week, the Vice President-elect Mike Pence rallying Republicans to try to upend the Affordable Care Act. President Obama was there as well, meeting with Democrats behind closed doors to try and save his signature piece of legislation, telling Democrats to fight future efforts to repeal or replace it. It's that push to get rid of the Affordable Care Act that helped to get Donald Trump elected, of course, and helped Mike Pence become second in command. Pence promised, though, not to pull the rug out from the roughly $20 million now insured through the ACA and the various exchanges.
We're also working on a series of executive orders that the president-elect will put into effect to ensure that there is an orderly transition during the period after we repeal Obamacare.
Pence's time working as both Indiana governor and the vice president-elect will come to an end Monday when Eric Holcomb, of course, is sworn in. So what is Pence's legacy in the Hoosier state? It's a question we're putting to our political insiders later and to someone who's been at Pence's side for much of his time in office. To talk about Governor Mike Pence's legacy here in the state of Indiana, we want to welcome in his Deputy Chief of Staff, Matt Lloyd. Matt, thanks so much for being here. Good to see you. What is Governor Pence's legacy here in the state of Indiana so far?
Yeah, I think Hoosiers can be proud of the job that the governor has done and the things that have happened under Governor Pence the past 4 years. When the governor, before he took office in 2012, he said he wanted more people working than ever before in our state's history before the end of his first term, and we achieved that early. We've added more than 165,000 new private sector jobs to the rolls. Unemployment has been cut in half from the day Governor Pence took the oath of office back in 2012 to his final day in office, which will be tomorrow. And you know, there's just a lot to be proud of. We've made advances in healthcare. We have almost 400,000 people added to the Healthy Indiana plan, which is consumer-driven healthcare for low-income people, which is going to be a model nationally as we look to rewrite the laws on healthcare and replace Obamacare. We made record investments in education. We've made record investments in transportation. Test scores are up. Hoosiers just have a lot to be proud of, and the governor could not be more proud of the work that Hoosiers have done. We have the hardest working people in the country right here in Indiana, and that's a lot of the reason he believes for the success that has been achieved over the past 4 years.
Those who had opposed Governor Pence when he was running for re-election here, they critically will point to RFRA as one of the things that they will remember most about Governor Pence and his time as governor here in Indiana. Is that fair?
I think the results are in the numbers, like I just mentioned, and you know, every elected official has their ups and downs, but you know, I think we need to look at the results, and we now have Salesforce expanding in Indianapolis. The FFA re-up for another 9 years, nearly a decade here to hold their convention here in Indianapolis. And the results aren't just limited to Indianapolis. Hoist Lift Truck came over from Illinois in Chicago and is now has added new jobs to northern Indiana. So Amazon was another one that announced about the same time that FFA did. And you know, you can't go a day. You know this. You're on our email list. You can't go a day without getting another jobs announcement out of the administration. So, you know, I think that at the end of the day, those are the results that matter, and that's what people need to look at.
Let's talk about his current role now. Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump, and I think a lot of us are resigned to the fact that there's no changing Donald Trump, for better or for worse. Mike Pence, though, has already had a big imprint on the incoming administration. Talk about his role so far.
Well, I think the governor, Donald Trump, made a wise choice. The governor spent 10 years, as we talked about, in leadership positions on Capitol Hill. He's very well respected. He has those relationships. They're going to be needed to help shepherd through an agenda that is pro-growth, that is pro-consumer-driven healthcare, and makes the investments in education and our infrastructure system that are going to help move the country forward. And as the governor said this week when he was up on Capitol Hill, it's all about jobs. And you know, something that we've done well in Indiana, and Donald Trump has told everyone that, you know, Indiana is one of the fiscal envies of the country, and that's one of the reasons he has great confidence, I think, in choosing Governor Pence for this role, and I think he'll excel in that, using those relationships that he built from his time in Washington.
Finally, had things gone differently on Election Day, what would Governor Pence be up to right now?
I think you have a panel of pundits who will probably love to speculate on that, but I think I would be able to add one thing from knowing the governor as long as I have. He has a servant's heart. And I have no doubt that he would be looking, he's always looking for ways to serve the people of this great state and the country. That's who he is. And you know, he wants to make a difference, and I think that's what he would be doing right now.
Mike Pence's Deputy Chief of Staff, Matt Lloyd, thanks for being here, bad back and all. And welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. For the first time this week, Indiana Governor-elect Eric Holcomb mapped out his agenda as he prepares to take on his new role as governor. His inauguration, of course, set for tomorrow. Indianapolis This Week's Rafael Sanchez joins us now with what exactly Governor-elect Holcomb's preparing for the rest of the year. Now could impact you, Rafael.
Jason, Eric Holcomb and his administration will be focused on 5 major issues for this year. Most are economic, none are social. In that regard, it's similar to the administration of former Governor Mitch Daniels. Now, Governor-elect Holcomb is making the economy, infrastructure, a balanced budget, and dealing with the drug epidemic among his top priorities. The issues of improved roads already becoming controversial, as it could include increases in taxes. And there would be no Democrats to blame on those increases, with the Republicans, as you know, in control of state government.
I envision Republicans getting the job done as we have for the last 12 years, and we'll find a way to do it. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, if we want new roads, if we want new maintenance, we're going to have to find new revenue.
And speaking of money, Jason Holcomb says toll roads are not his preference.
Probably not alone in that. Now, Rafael, another big issue, education and the future of these state schools, Chief.
Well, the governor-elect Holcomb believes that position should be selected versus being elected.
And I think the longer we wait, we've talked about this, and there's been bills, various bills over the years. We've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, and I think it's time to get it done.
So new schools chief Jennifer McCormick, who just won her office, may not get a chance to seek a re-election if she wants to in 4 years. We'll see what happens. Jason?
Rafael, thank you so much. Meanwhile, House Republicans moving ahead with that sweeping plan to maintain and update the state's roads and bridges with increases to the gasoline tax and new fees for all vehicles registered in Indiana, including electric cars.
Our goal is not to strap the next generation with the costs of building assets today, and that's what our state has been doing for generations. So it's a program that's responsible, comprehensive, sustainable.
Democrats say that they agree with the urgency of the issue, but they're calling for a review of other tax policies before hiking prices at the pump. Here's RTV6 State House reporter Katie Hines with State Democratic leader Tim Lannon.
What is your reaction to the House GOP's proposed transportation funding plan?
Well, you know, I think you have to look at it in the overall context of it's not just a plan to fund infrastructure needs, which are definitely there, and it's very valid that we, of course, have to deal with that. But you have to also, I think, consider the overall tax climate in which these increases are being asked. Certainly, it's one thing to say, well, for the average Hoosier, it's only going to amount to, you know, something like $1.50 or something per week or whatever it boils out to be. But that adds up it depends on how many vehicles you have, how often you're driving. You know, if you're a family of 4 and you've got 2 vehicles and maybe even a teenager who's out there driving, you know, it's going to add up to hundreds of dollars a year that we're asking that average Hoosiers pay at the pump. And so I think we need to analyze where are we in this environment of asking everybody to pay more in taxes, while at the same time we're rolling out some continuing tax breaks to certain folks in the state of Indiana. It also plays into overall the revenues that we'll have there, just in the big picture as far as funding the various priorities that we have as a state going forward with the budget. So it'll take a long time for us to analyze this to see exactly, you know, is there a shift here? I suspect there is a shift, maybe to average citizens here in the state of Indiana as far as funding for this infrastructure. It is needed, and we do need to come up with a plan. I agree with that.
Republicans estimate they need at $1.2 billion. Can you do it with perhaps certain components of what they've proposed, maybe the gas tax increase and not the electric vehicle fee increase, or do you think this all needs to still be part of the picture?
Well, it probably does have to be sort of a comprehensive approach here, and that's why I say one of the things you do have to look at is, are you going to continue to hand out these tax breaks? You know, several years ago in 2013 and 2014 we enacted tax cuts. Some of them were for everybody in terms of individual income tax cuts. Well, those have phased out now, but the tax cuts for corporations and businesses continue, and I think it's fair now to say, do we draw back on those, given the fact that we are looking at a need of $1 billion a year, I've heard as high as $1.4, $1.5 billion a year to keep up with our infrastructure.
What's at stake in this conversation?
Well, I think what's at stake here is maybe overall tax fairness in the state of Indiana, but also the economy. There is an economic development aspect to this, because you can't have a successful economy if you don't have quality infrastructure. So, and that is, by the way, not just state infrastructure, it's also local infrastructure. It also could include, you know, things like mass transit and other things that we ought to be maybe taking a look at as far as the future of the state of Indiana. So it's very important.
A good-looking bunch of political insiders we have here today. Mary Beth Schneider, Laura Beck for the Democrats, Abdul Hakim Shabazz, our favorite conservative commentator. Let's talk about Indianapolis East, i.e. Washington, D.C. now. Mike Pence, Dan Coates. Pence is really leaving his imprint early on this administration.
Absolutely. You are seeing, I think, far more influence from Pence on Trump than you perhaps have seen in most past vice presidents. Dick Cheney may be the exception there, since he made himself vice president. But clearly, I think Mike Pence is going to have an outsized voice in Washington. Dan Coates, he's brought in other aides. There is an Indiana stamp here that I don't think we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think we probably haven't seen an Indiana stamp like that in recent years.
Good thing or bad thing?
Well, I never thought I would say this, but I mean, I have to say it's a little bit more competency than what we were going to get from the Trump administration. I think the challenge becomes for the Hoosiers who are going there and the Hoosiers who are working in that area is that Donald Trump is president, not Mike Pence, and so they are serving at his whims. Well, I mean, you know, year of wishful thinking for Abdul, but
you should have seen him waiting behind you to say it. He's just waiting and waiting.
He literally is like waiting to pounce. But I do think, though, that for these folks, being with Donald Trump as your president, I mean, on Friday morning, he was not tweeting about the intelligence briefing, but about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Nielsen ratings. So I think that would be a very big challenge in that area.
But regardless of whatever Donald Trump tweets or doesn't tweet, you know, Dan Coates, Director of National Intelligence, Seema Varmer as head of Center for Medicare Services, these are sharp, brilliant, smart, quality people. I would argue the challenge for someone like a Dan Coats or Seema Varma is going to be the Washington bureaucracy that's just been entrenched for so long that does not like change.
Well, Dan Coats is a part of the Washington bureaucracy.
Dan Coats is not part of the Washington bureaucracy.
I think the interesting thing on Dan Coats is taking over intelligence. Dan Coats is so disliked by Russia that they banned him from coming there. And we've all seen the bromance that Trump Putin have.
Well, and I think that probably has to send some reassuring signs to folks like John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
And to the CIA.
And to the CIA, who are really concerned. I mean, we could do worse, and frankly, it's probably better for the country.
Let's now talk about Governor-elect Eric Holcomb, set to become governor. Holcomb tomorrow. Any signs that we got about his potential administration and future this week as he mapped out his agenda?
Yes, I was in the room when the governor-elect made the final cabinet picks. Also, has entire staff spelled out his agenda, and it really did feel almost sort of retro 2005 in the days of Mitch Daniels. And a lot of people wondering, will Eric Holcomb be more like Mitch Daniels or more like Mike Pence? Holcomb will eventually be, he will be his own governor, but to start, you saw a lot of familiar faces from the Daniels administration. I think at least at the start, that's where they're going to begin.
Laura, how are Democrats feeling about Holcomb taking over?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I think it really does. I don't think he is defined. I mean, the way we have seen him as a partisan, since he has come from running a campaign background. He's never served in elected office before. He's run a lot of nasty campaigns, so that's what we've seen of him. So I think it's really his opportunity to prove who he is. I feel sorry for him in a way because he's sandwiched between Mitch Daniels and Mike Pence. And so to try and forge your own identity is going to be a challenge, particularly since you've got a very strong Speaker of the House in Brian Bosma, who has never made a secret of his gubernatorial aspirations. So this session, I think, will be somewhat of a challenge for them, and I think that they have to be incredibly serious as they're putting together their plans and to work across party aisles.
Is this your New Year's wish? Is this your New Year's wish resolution?
No,
I love you to death.
You're not giving her any time.
I'm sorry, but nothing could be further from the truth. Eric, Brian, David Long, those people all known each other for years. They're all going to work together just fine to get Indiana's. Will there be some tension between the executive and legislative branches? Yes.
There is always tension.
Because there's always tension. But Indiana only has one governor at a time.
I want you to say your line about who's the most powerful person in the State House during session.
The Speaker of the House is always the most powerful person during the session. And that's why this is going to be really interesting, seeing what happens on road funding.
Yeah.
And in some ways, Eric Holcomb's in a bad spot because they cut taxes before he went in, and those tax cuts went to help wealthy people in business. Now they need to raise taxes in order to fund road funding and infrastructure, and those taxes are going to fall on all of us.
And not to mention, they're talking about, are we going to put tolls on some of our freeways, and that's something he said Governor-elect Holcomb said I don't want to do because he went through in 2005 when they sold the toll road and privatized it, and that was not pretty.
Well, they did not sell the toll road. The toll road was leased. I mean, first of all, the governor-elect made it perfectly clear at his news conference past week. Said, hey, you want the roads, you got to figure out a way to pay for them. And a fuel tax, whether it's adjusted for inflation or put on an electric vehicle or alternate fuel vehicle, is the ultimate user fee. If you drive, the more gas you use, the more you pay. And by the way, if you had used income taxes and sales taxes, newsflash, it's only Hoosiers that'll be footing the bill for the roads when you have all this traffic. Because remember, Indiana's a crossroads of America where within a day's drive of 80% of the population, the folks driving through Indiana, when they pay fuel taxes, will also be paying for those roads.
You did a very good job with your talking point.
A+ to Abdul, which you love.
I know.
I just have to read all this stuff.
Very quickly, we heard from Matt Lloyd earlier, and we pontificated about what Mike Pence would be doing had he not won in November. Is Eric Holcomb now set to become governor? What would Mike Pence be doing right now had they not won on Election Day?
Vacationing somewhere warm.
Smart idea.
Attending Eric Holcomb's inauguration.
Followed by?
Going to somewhere warm.
Think tank.
Got it. Quickly, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg stepping in, throwing his hat in the ring to become the DNC chair. Abdul, you said it can't hurt.
Well, seeing how Democrats took it on the chin this past election season, anybody but Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which as a colleague of mine once said is a perfectly waste of a good hyphen in a name, has got to be a better choice than that. Pete Buttigieg, I mean, moderate Indiana Democrat, I think he'd be good, but I don't think he could get through where Democrats are going to go down the road.
Too young?
Oh, I don't think he's too young at all. I mean, he's got an incredibly impressive resume, and he's done a great job as mayor of South Bend. I think that what he is showing is he's an alternative to the coastal Democrats that you see that because of some of those strategies, we are losing the Midwest. And so having a Midwestern chair, I think, would be very good for the party. In fact, we had a Midwestern chair in Joe Andrew when he was chair of the DNC back when Bill Clinton was president.
And quickly, you said it can't hurt.
Can't hurt. He'd be a good pick, but I think he'll just build his resume, and maybe you'll see him run for governor.
Mary Beth, Laura Abdul, thanks for joining us.